everybody. Welcome to St. Paul's Muskego's Sound Engineering course. I am your instructor today, Mr. Alex Bennett. It's so good to have you guys here. I'm hoping that this will be really useful for all of the sound engineers, but also the musicians too. We're going to try and delve into a bit of, I guess, quite a few topics that hopefully will be important to all of you. And so without spending too much time talking about all of this intro stuff, let's get right into it here. This is going to be an overview of everything that we cover today. We're going to have the science of sound, so just a quick introduction into how sound works, how you hear stuff, and what control you have over it. What are the tools that you have will be the next section. This is going to be for both the sound engineers and the musicians. What is it that you can do to make the sound, as pleasing as possible or to achieve the goals that you have? An introduction to EQ, which is probably EQ is probably what everybody thinks of the most when they think of sound engineering. They think about moving the EQ, sliders up and down, faders, excuse me. I gotta use the right technical jargon. And finally, we have the art of engineering. So the mindset of the sound engineer, and hopefully what the engineers give you guys a quick roundabout what you should be thinking about, and maybe musicians, maybe you'll have a different perspective of, oh, okay, this is where the sound engineers are coming from. So with that being said, let's hop right into the first part here. So we have ourselves a gigantic picture kind of depicting a lot of what makes up a sound wave, right? So first of all, I should establish that when you make a sound, it actually does come out in waves, which is represented here, right? And we typically refer to this as a sine wave because it's a nice, perfect, clear wave that you can see. It's nice and even, okay? And there's quite a few factors to it, but we're going to focus on just 3 today to make things nice and simple. We're going to talk about amplitude, frequency, and finally wavelength, all right? So amplitude, let's start with the volume first, because why wouldn't we start with the volume, okay? So amplitude is measured in what's called decibels, right? Or you might say dB for short. Decibels, to give you an idea for how loud we are typically here at the bridge on any given Sunday, we're usually hovering right around 90 decibels. We usually try not to go much louder than that. Some other examples might be if you're outside and traffic is going by you, traffic on the freeway is usually somewhere between 70 and 80 decibels. Your house is probably on average between 50 and 60 decibels, assuming nobody in the house is making any noise. If you're at a rock concert, you're probably at 100 to 110 decibels. And if the siren is going by your house, that's probably 120 to 130 decibels. It's really, really, really loud, right? But that's amplitude, is how loud the sound comes out. Next, we have frequency. So frequency is measured in hertz, or Hz, and hertz means vibrations per second, all right? We'll talk a bit about, in just a second, about how, what we hear as far as hertz is concerned, but frequency is just how quickly the noise is made, right? So lower, things that don't have a lot of frequency or are really low on the spectrum, that's the subs, that's the bass that you hear. And then the faster the frequency, the higher the pitch that you hear it. And then finally, wavelength. We're going to talk about that, right? So wavelength is almost directly tied to frequency. The less frequent that the wave happens, the wider it is, okay? There's a reason that typically subwoofers have much bigger speakers on them. It's because they have much bigger sound waves to reproduce, okay? And this is important for a lot of reasons, mostly because smaller frequencies, since they're so tiny, they don't have their ability to work around stuff, right? So if you go to a rock concert or someplace that's really loud and you stand outside of the building, you don't hear all of the high-end clarity and brilliance of everything. You hear the low ends, all right? And the reason for that is because it has more energy, and it's also a larger wavelength, so it has its ability to work its way around stuff. So an easy example might be if you put your hand in front of your mouth, or obviously we've been wearing masks for the last year, so you guys understand that if you put a mask over somebody's mouth, then they start to sound more dull, right? And as soon as they take it off, it sounds nice and clear. So this is just one way that wavelength is really, really important for how we function and for understanding how the sound works. So let's go a little bit deeper into some of the frequencies, right? So I've been using a piano as the example, right? If I go to a piano and I play the note middle C, and we measure it in hertz, or the frequency that we just talked about, right? Middle C on a piano is somewhere around 220 hertz, okay? You can measure that scientifically, obviously. This we would call the fundamental frequency, that 220 hertz, okay? It's the basis, the lowest register for that note that we're making, right? But that's not all there is to the sound. When we get to the EQ section here in a little while, in the third section, we'll talk a bit about how we can influence everything that goes on. But you know that some pianos are brighter, or every piano has a little bit of a different sound. And that's because they have overtones to them, right? So overtones are all of these other extra frequencies that stack up on top of the fundamental, right? And there's actually a science to how these overtones work. And when you understand the science, you actually start to see that all of our scales that we've built up, like major scales, for example, they're not an accident. We actually subconsciously hear them. It's really, really cool, but I'm totally a nerd about it, so I guess I would think it's probably pretty cool, huh? After that, we have timbre, right? So timbre is really the balance of the fundamental and all of these overtones, right? So let me give you an example. I used the piano earlier. We said that the piano has its own balance of these overtones, right? But if I played a C on an acoustic guitar or an electric guitar, or if I sang a C, or if Mike sang a C, or if Rhonda sang a C, right? We would all be able to tell our voices and the instruments independently. Why? Well, it's because they all have their own unique balance of these overtones, and that's timbre, right? Now, as we get into the EQ section, we'll talk about how we can balance those things and how we can artificially control those. But for now, just understand that everybody has their own unique timbre, and each instrument has their own unique timbre. All right, so last but not least in our EQ section here, we have the 20 to 20,000 hertz range of human hearing, right? This is the complete range of what it is that we can hear, and it's actually quite a lot. To think that we have the ability to hear over 20,000 individual frequencies is quite astounding. But the reason I bring this up is because seeing this graph, I guess it makes it easier to have a visual representation, knowing that each instrument that is on the stage is going to have its own strength and its own weakness in where it fits in this category. Some instruments won't go very far down below. For example, if you're a violinist, you're not going to see yourself going very far down this spectrum, right? As opposed to if you're a piano player, you have a really broad range in here, right? And so as a sound engineer, the sound engineer's job is to basically carve out a unique place where each of those instruments is strong, so that way they stand out better in a mix. And rather than stacking a bunch of people on the same frequency, all right, you can think of it like Tetris, where everybody has their own spot that they should belong, and hopefully if you stack everybody together well, then you have a nice balanced sound where not only does it sound full, but you can also hear the articulation of everybody, and everybody stands out together, right? It just creates this nice big wall of sound. So for my sound engineers, one of your jobs is going to be understanding where each of these, where a bunch of the instruments fit on this spectrum. It does take time to learn, but as you do this more and more, you'll start to understand the strengths and weaknesses of every instrument and where they need to shine and where they need to cut back. For my musicians, I'd really love you to get to know your own instruments a little more. Where do you shine, right? And that's going to be important because it's not only going to influence like maybe the way that you hear your instruments and maybe control the timbre of your instrument, but also maybe the way that you play, right? As a guitar player, I know that there's different times when I need to play low on the neck and high on the neck, and so musicians, take the time to understand the timbre of your instruments and where you guys sit.